With me right now, we have Alexi McCammond, MSNBC political analyst and host of the podcast In Sync with Alexi. And we have Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, president of NextGen America. Good to have you both back with us. So, Alexi, I'm curious your reaction to this meeting that's coming up. Are you at all surprised that it's happening so quickly, or is this the norm? And I'm curious also what you make of President Biden's reaction to the election overall.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex. I think that it's interesting seeing Democrats, President Biden, Vice President Harris sort of saying, let's move on, business as usual, let's move forward. We have seen reporting where some staffers of Harris have sort of said as much, saying that they're confused by the messaging that Trump was a threat to democracy. And now everyone at the top is sort of saying, well, let's just move forward and kind of normalize this. It is interesting that the clear threats posed by Donald Trump to the country are no longer at the top of what President Biden or Vice President Harris are saying. That said, Democrats have never been the party to stoop to Trump's behavior, to change decorum or the way that things are done peacefully and respectfully because of the way that Trump operates. And so that's certainly admirable. But I do think it is surprising how quickly it's happening.
Well, I think maybe in the shock, the aftermath, or just looking at the counting of the numbers, the votes, they won fair and square. You have to give that to them. But when it comes to issues, Cristina, as the Trump transition team, works on plans to carry out mass deportations, as he has pledged to do, we've got some new exclusive NBC News reporting that they are considering ending two Biden administration programs which allowed more than 1 million immigrants to legally enter the U.S. It could cause hundreds of thousands of those immigrants to face deportation if they've not been formally given asylum. So talk about the impact of that, not only for those families, but for the country as a whole.
Well, I think people have to remember that J.D. Vance has said that even Haitian immigrants that are legally allowed in the United States, amongst other groups that have legal status to be here, that they want to revoke them from having that legal status. They have questioned the legality of all kinds of programs. And then if you look at people behind the Trump administration, like Stephen Miller, who helped guide the last administration's most draconian policies, where we saw immigrant children being ripped from their mothers, raids across communities that spread terror across mixed status families, that they're also trying to stop what they call, the majority becoming people of color in the country. They want to maintain a white majority. So people have to also understand it from that lens. This, again, is not just about those that are undocumented. This is about trying to change the demographics. When Trump was in office, they also did things like say they wanted to get rid of birthright citizenship, that they wanted to change how the census was done. So whether it's undercounting immigrants and their children in the U.S. Census, trying to shift who is legal in the United States, or going after undocumented immigrants, people in the American public need to know this is an attempt to keep a white majority by the white supremacist wing of the Donald Trump campaign and party.
So that brings me to this question to you, Cristina. One of the biggest headlines of this election is Trump's gains with Latino voters, a 14-point jump from 2020. That's according to our exit polls. Why that group in particular? What did Democrats miss or take for granted, potentially? And what do they need to change in the future?
Right. I think there's two components. One, a lot of Latinos are immigrants or come from immigrant families. And then other Latinos have been in the United States since the United States was even a country. But what we saw, and I can tell you, I live here in Texas, where 1 in 5 Latinos live, where they made a lot of ground. Latinos, we are one of the most poor demographics in the United States. So a huge percentage of us make under $15 an hour. We have twice the national average that we're likely to be uninsured and not have access to health care. And Donald Trump tapped into and preyed on the Latino population that's incredibly poor. Now, when I talk about seeing a pathway forward, if you look at what Bernie Sanders did in 2020 in the primary, he bet that he could win the primary if he invested heavily in the Latino population, with an understanding that a strong economic populist message, deeply investing in Latino media and communications, could win a significant portion, that there is a significant portion of the Latino population that is up for grabs. And you can be mad about it, or you can get organized about it. And I think Democrats need to get organized about it and understand that economic populism is how we're going to win this population back.
So, Alexi, white suburban women went for Republicans 53 to 46%. That is down slightly from 2020, but it's still not what Democrats are hoping for. Have we maybe reached the limit of how far the abortion issue can be relied upon to get voters to the polls?
I read it a little differently, Alex. I think that throughout history, we have seen white women siding with our oppressors over with, Black women. We have seen white women upset about Black men getting the right to vote before they had the right to vote, not so that all women could have the right to vote, but because they didn't want Black men to have the right to vote before them. We have seen throughout history, white women in particular, siding with white men, powerful white men, just so that they can have a seat at the table, even though those white men aren't looking out for their own interests. So while I do think the abortion issue is something that Democrats perhaps over-indexed on, I do argue that we have seen this throughout history. And in some ways, it's not surprising to see that large share of white female voters supporting Donald Trump at a time like this.